Hello everyone and welcome to Wavelength. I am Gaurav and we are so privileged and so honored to have Dr. Jane Thomson over here with us. Thank you so much Jane for being here first and foremost. And just in order to give an entire introduction, you just have to check out her LinkedIn link within the description because she's done so much throughout the years and she's had impact in multiple domains. But the way that I know her is what I'll try to tell you the story about. So, in 2017, that was also the time when, and Jane will of course talk about her story into blockchain, but when people were trying to implement blockchain in social impact projects or somewhere where there could be much more tangible benefits to those sections of the society which usually are bereft from the benefits, right? So during that time, I was following her on LinkedIn and she was so massively popular. And after sending her a message, I was so happy when you gave the response itself because I was 99% sure that I wouldn't get a response. But still, I sent her a message. I remember the date, 6th September 2017. And just basically saying that I've been following your work and I'm thinking of some project. Can you please discuss? And I forgot about it because I knew you were not going to respond. But then she did respond. We had video calls after that. I think the first video call you were in London, and that time I was discussing with her regarding some blockchain pilots that we could do. And I was working with Mr. Alex Paul Menon in Chhattisgarh. Can we involve some global expertise so that Chhattisgarh can experience some blockchain implementations? And we actually ended up doing the pilots, and without Jane's help, it would not have been possible at all. Because Jane flew all the way to Chhattisgarh in Raipur and she gave presentations, and that gave an entire new impetus, a new life, the main force to it. And since then, she has been a mentor and advisor and friend, not just to me, but to my entire team right now. Even after that, when I began the startup journey with my co-founders and my team, she was also the part of the first blockchain workshop that I had taken. And through that blockchain workshop is how we came to know some of my teammates right now. They began as interns because they got interested in blockchain. So in a way, my team, I owe it to you as well. And she's been constantly a source of inspiration and support. And she's here in India. And just yesterday, on the 6th of August, we had the pleasure of having Jane over to D.Y. Patil University, where Mr. Pramod Patil sir and Dr. P.D. Patil sir had invited us. And it was such a wonderful event that they had organized, and because of Jane also, it was made possible. And we also had a launch of the book. We'll just shortly have talk about it during the conversation. And today we are here. So again, thank you Jane for being here, and thank you for being a part of our story. So the first thing that I would want to know is, can you just tell your story? A bit. Like, how has your been the life journey? Can you please tell our audience?
So, I've always felt that I could do something to make the world better from a very early age. My mother took the children on a study tour of Indonesia with Community Aid Abroad and Oxfam, and we went and looked at their projects as well as touring around Indonesia. And in Central Java, I met this Australian volunteer who'd been there for 14 years, working with poor families in Central Java. And I was so deeply moved by her work and what she'd done with the communities that I thought, I really want to do that. And so I went back inspired by her, and I enrolled in community development. And that's what I studied. And then I tried to go straight back to Indonesia to follow that dream that I had. But it didn't turn out quite like that because I did go to Indonesia. I didn't get on a community development program. I actually got on an Asian Development Bank project. And I realized how foolish I was because actually I didn't know anything. I just had willingness to do something helpful. And I learned a lot culturally. I learned a lot about myself, and I realized that you can't just waltz into someone else's country because you care. Yeah. You actually have to have some skills and something to offer. So that was when I decided that I needed to go back and find a sector and do my master's degree.
Wow.
So when I went back, I literally just applied for every master's course that I could think of. I could have done agriculture, I could have done health, I could have done education, but I got accepted into public health. So I did my master's in public health, which was like really, really fascinating. And we did 1 year coursework and 1 year field work, and I wanted to go back to Indonesia, but I couldn't. It was very difficult to go. The government made it expensive. There was a big approval process, and I had no money anyway. So I decided, well, I'll get a job. So I applied for different jobs, and I got offered a job in South Sudan.
Wow.
Yes, I know. And it was in a place called Malakal, which sounded like a very far away place to me.
And it is, of course.
Yes, I know. But then they rang me up and they said, there's been a flood and the house you were going to live in is now washed away. And I said, well, what do you propose? And they said, well, there's no more houses we can put you in. All we can do is send you 10 hours up the river by boat to a sub-base.
Wow.
And I was already thinking it was remote. And I said, is there any other members of the team there? So they said, there's an Irish community development officer. And I just went, I'm sorry, I don't think I can do that. And I rang up a friend of mine who'd been doing the masters, and she was going to Papua New Guinea. And I rang her up and I said, Julia, what date are you going to Papua New Guinea? 16th of December. What flight? PX 96? I said, I'm coming too. So I literally booked that flight, got on the plane with her, went with her to the Institute of Medical Research. They didn't know I was coming because she was going to the field to do her research. And I said, hello, I'm Jane, and I'd like to go to the field with Julia. So that's how I got to PNG, and I ended up doing my research work there, and I ended up actually living there for 10 years. It was a very, very fascinating time working on so many different public health problems.
Of course, the entire experience, was it too challenging to adapt, or did you find yourself seamlessly blending into, how was it? Because it would have been a completely new environment.
Oh, an amazing adventure. I mean, while I was at the Institute of Medical Research, they actually discovered a tribe that never had contact anymore. And I did research work in an area where they'd never seen white women, and they'd only seen the last white men 15 years ago, and not even all the villages. We went to unmapped villages. So we literally get dropped by a plane on a dirt strip and then left. And no mobile phones, no nothing, no communications. And we literally had to walk across rivers, up mountains, rope bridges to get to these very remote villages. So it was hard, but it was fascinating, just amazing meeting people that had had almost no contact ever before. But this is in a way what took me to blockchain, which probably sounds unlikely, because through that experience and through my experience in Papua New Guinea and other countries, I understood how disconnected the poor are, how little they have, and how they're not part of the world as we know it. They don't have electricity, they don't have identity, they don't have connectivity to the economic system, and huge geographic barriers to, being able to access any of that. And so kind of, if I told you my whole life story, it would be way too long. But if you fast forward,
no.
But if you fast forward, that's the mindset that I had when I started looking at blockchain. Is how do you help these highly disadvantaged, remote and isolated communities? And when my introduction to blockchain came through my son, who told me to buy Bitcoin in 2010, and I didn't buy it. And then he came back in 2016 and he was very cross with me.
Pretty understandable.
And then he said, you need to learn about blockchain because blockchain is going to change everything. And so I was a bit chastened because I hadn't bought Bitcoin. I still didn't buy Bitcoin, by the way, but I started to learn about blockchain. And it was confusing and difficult and complicated and counterintuitive. But then at one point it all came together for me around me thinking about a humanitarian emergency. So my company had worked in Indonesia after the Banda Aceh tsunami. And that was a terrible event where 200,000 people lost their lives in the tsunami.
Yes.
But it was the chaos that ensued after that, which was also tragic. So no one knew who was lost. No one knew who was injured. No one knew who was in the hospitals, in the camps. All the bank records were lost. All the registration records were lost. All the health records were lost. Everything was lost. And people wanted to send money to the survivors, but they had no way to directly send money to survivors. So all of those kinds of things, which I suddenly realised, if their identity and their connection to all of those records had somehow been hashed securely onto a blockchain in the cloud somewhere, it wouldn't have taken away from the terrible tragedy, but it just would have helped the reconstruction so much more. And it was at that moment that I realised that there was a real place for this technology in humanitarian emergencies. And once I thought about that, I thought about identity, and I thought about women's and children's health and agricultural supply chains. And that was my aha moment. And I thought, I have to get involved in this technology, finding the startups and the people who are building those social impact projects, write about it, talk about it, help people like you who are already doing these things. And just not long after that, maybe a few months after I came to Chattisgarh, I resigned my job as CEO, and I just went out to see what the blockchain journey had for me.
Because the beauty of it is blockchain as a technology, like the first law of technology says, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral, by Melvin Kranzberg. But what you bring to the technology and then hold it and then take it in a direction that you want it to, that requires a philosophy which is already in place. That requires a temperament, a sensibility which is already in place. So what you brought to the blockchain was really fascinating. And where you want to take blockchain ahead from this point onwards, I think that is what the technology sorely needs. Not just blockchain, any technology, but we'll focus on blockchain for now. Because how else are we going to make any meaningful change if we are not ready to pull the technology with us, rather than just depending upon the big monopolies to guide the evolution of technologies or anything else. And that is the beauty of it. So when you, as you said, you resigned as a CEO and you went into blockchain full time, what do you think is the direction that this technology, the trajectory? So if you could just sum up your experiences of how this technology has been evolving until now, and what do you predict about the technology from here onwards? And there's something different from prediction, that where would you want it to go? Prediction is something we just, it's not in our hands, we just go by the current trends. But there's also an idealism that exists. So if you could just talk about the journey of blockchain as a technology through your lens, because you've been at the crossroads, at the center stage.
Yeah, so I think if I start in 2017 when I got involved, in fact, that was the ICO phase. That was when they were having the initial coin offerings and people were making so much money and everyone was scrambling in the space, and many of them were fraudsters. Some of them were raising money for good projects. Some of them raised far too much money, but it was a very, very hot space and everyone was trying to make money. So it was actually very crowded and hard to start talking about social impact when you went to a blockchain conference. It was just wall-to-wall ICOs and people who were trying to make money. And I was like really nervous and I felt like no one's going to listen to me. But surprisingly, after I got up on stage, it was London Blockchain Week 2017, and I started talking about it, people were coming up to me after my speech, mainly developers, and just going, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought that you could use blockchain in this way. Can I help you? I really like what you're talking about. And so even that small amount of encouragement made me feel emboldened to try and go and do more. But I spent a lot of time during 2017 and 2018, especially with, if I would say, legacy players, international agencies and international donors, they were not interested in hearing about this. They had a very bad idea about Bitcoin, crypto, dark web, and they threw me out the door as quick as they could at that time. But gradually, over the next year or so, people had started looking at it. The World Food Programme was a kind of early adopter. UNICEF looked at it. The UN Women started looking at it. So people then started coming to the technology. But the first year was tough because a lot of people really weren't interested, were ignorant and were scared. But then what happened was the US SEC made certain rulings about ICOs, and so the whole ICO craze dampened off, and a lot of people flocked or withered out of the space. And so what I saw happening during that period was that the people who were building solid projects with utility kept building. The sort of fly-by-nighters, they left the space for that moment. And, I think we saw some growth and development during that time. And then it was probably 2019 we started to hear about DeFi, but not much.
Yeah.
I did go to one sort of conference in Washington about DeFi, but to be honest with you, I didn't feel like even the guys who were running the conference knew what it was. But I went. But it was in 2020 when the pandemic was on that I think we saw tremendous innovation in blockchain. So the first vertical, if you like, was in healthcare, clearly, because healthcare needed it. So everyone started working remotely. People had to find a way to securely share data. People had to be able to provide care to people that they couldn't go and visit. So with blockchain and AI and different technologies, people were starting to create this. And also there was fake PPE equipment turned up, so people started using blockchain for provenance. People started using blockchain for payments in accounting. And then we saw things like the play-to-earn game phenomenon in the Philippines, where when the countries shut down, the people who earned cash on the streets couldn't make money and couldn't eat. But a whole cohort of people discovered they could play this game called Axie Infinity and earn enough money in the game to feed their families. So that was really an amazing phenomenon, which is now absolutely boomed. And you see the growth in the whole play to earn to learn, exercise, earn to X has really burgeoned. And then there are these gaming guilds all around the world that are quite huge. So that was the second thing that happened in the pandemic. And then the third one was NFTs just got hot. But NFTs were around. I remember seeing CryptoKitties in 2017. And actually I remember just laughing at them when my friend who was a developer showed them to me. I thought, that's ridiculous. No one's ever done. That'll never stick. So I was wrong about that. Anyway, so NFTs then really took off. Yeah. And decentralized finance really took off during the pandemic in a big way. And I think it was for a couple of reasons, because people didn't have much to do. Yeah. But second, because they called DeFi the sort of, Lego building. So you could take a piece of code from GitHub that someone else has built, and then you can add a few bells and whistles and launch it as your own incredibly quickly. So we saw a huge number of DeFi projects being launched during 2020, 2021. And then I think moving right along there was and Axie Infinity was an example of that, the gaming and blockchain coming together so people could exchange and extract value from games. And I think that's kind of how we're nearly getting to the metaverse. Yeah. Because, Mark Zuckerberg did shine a light on it, and everyone's now excited about the metaverse. But, I think the metaverse is a culmination of a number of technologies that people have been working on for many years, including AR, VR and so forth, but also the fact that you now have the potential for Web3, the so-called Internet of Value. The blockchain can be combined with games so people can actually earn value and take it out of the games, which hadn't happened before. So I think we started then to see the possibilities of taking that Web3 ideal and moving it into an immersive environment, which is why I think the metaverse is getting people so excited these days. And, there's more than 160 companies who are building some form of metaverses. Yeah.
So, when it comes to blockchain, Web3, metaverse, and of course interrelated, all of them. But if you can chart out your prediction that how it would turn out for, let's say, the next 1 year or 2 years, what do you see happening with it?
Well, I think I'm going to have my optimistic prediction and my less optimistic prediction. Because, in the philosophy and spirit of Web3 and decentralization, then we dream that we're going to democratize access. Everyone's going to be able to have access and get fair value from the system, the content creators and the artists, and we'll be able to reward the farmers, and everyone will be connected to the financial system, and we'll be looking after the planet, and we'll all be happy. I like the spirit of that, and I strive for that. But what we know is that even this issue about blockchain cuts out the middlemen. Well, first of all, those middlemen are people, and they're losing their livelihoods, and they're not all, sort of giant greedy banks. Some of them are just little guy who buy the farmer's coffee, for example. And so whoever those different groups are, they're going to fight really hard against this. Plus, I think we see governments struggle to understand it and think about how best not to stifle innovation, but to regulate it. And they tend to react, or many governments react first by just going, well, we'll crack down. Although what we're seeing, and I think that this is an interesting phenomenon, is that many of the countries that move very quickly to get regulation and attract blockchain companies were small states. So these were countries that traditionally had been hampered by geography, hampered by human resources and access to knowledge and access to markets. And suddenly this gives them that, but it also gives them the opportunity to attract blockchain companies to come and set up there, so we'll create jobs and industry and so forth. So, whether it was Bermuda, Barbados, Mauritius, Luxembourg, you just saw a lot of these really small countries going, okay, let's get in there and be first and see what we can build from this. And I think that, there's a large group of countries in the middle that allow some level of regulation and acceptance of blockchain and crypto, although it's very hard for crypto companies to be banked in most places. And then there's countries that are just completely cracked down. But I believe that it will be a continuum, because as you're watching in whatever country, they're all looking at it. The securities regulator, the commodities regulator, the private banks and the companies, they're all looking at it, and they're trying to figure out either, if they're the government, how they can make people safe and protect people against money laundering, terrorist financing and kind of consumer fraud. And many of the bigger companies are going, well, can we integrate this in our operations somehow? Like, we still want to be in charge, but this is pretty smart technology, so let's do some research about how we use it. So I think it'll be very much a kind of negotiated outcome, and it'll vary country by country. But always, if you pick something to work on that is not so controversial. So at the moment, for example, climate change and climate action and green finance and thinking about how to look after the planet is incredibly popular. And so moving into that area and showing how blockchain can tokenize carbon credits, help you do distributed energy systems, and those kinds of things, I think will be not very controversial, and many people will be looking at how they can actually use blockchain to help accelerate climate action.
As we were just discussing throughout the past many years that we've been in touch, it is what do you bring to the technology and where you want to take it is all governed by our life experiences and lessons. For example, when we started working for the agriculture project, they already had a philosophy in place for transparency. So blockchain became a way to implement it. So what are the lessons that you feel that you experienced is something that blockchain should imbibe within itself, and then that should make a part of it, the technology's journey. Can you just speak some of those insights and lessons of your life?
Well, I think the first one is we have to stop talking about blockchain, because once you start talking about blockchain, the technology is so confusing and to some extent complex and also a bit contested, because you'll start fighting about proof of work and proof of stake and so forth. You then lose the why. You lose the reason that you should be interested in blockchain.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be much better at explaining how this technology is going to help you. And everyone says this all the time. I don't know how the internet works, but I know what I can do with it. So I think we need to get better at explaining what you can do with it to people in intelligible form. So one of the things that, I've learned, because I honestly didn't know when I left my job as CEO, I honestly didn't know what I was doing or where I could play a role or, how that life would pan out that I'd chosen. But what I now realise, and it's really through kind of trial and error, is that there is a place for people who can be a bridge between the old world and the new, who understand what's going on in terms of the technology and where it's going and what it can do, but who can talk in a way that the average person who is not informed can understand. So to kind of create the connection, but create the vision or the understanding of what they can learn from it. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is I have been deeply moved in a way by how many people in the blockchain community actually really care, who really care about the planet, who are really trying to make a better place, who believe in the technology because they think it can do something good. And I find those are the people who started to follow me. Those are because I was just talking about, look, I think we can do this. I think we can do that. Did you see this startup? It's doing this here and there, and kind of bringing those people together. So I've really seen an absolute snowballing from the beginning, where I could barely find a person to have a conversation with about, blockchain and technology for social impact, to a really big supportive community who help each other. I mean, honestly, that community in blockchain is one of the most supportive communities that I've ever been part of. And you get to know people and you've never even met them. I mean, I actually got to know you quite quickly, but I met someone this morning that I've been interacting with over the airwaves for a long time. I've never ever met him in the flesh, but it was like we were really old friends. And so, I think it's that. And there's almost no country or city in the world I can go to that I don't have a community.
Yeah.
So that's like really heartwarming. And the other thing that it made me understand, because I never intended to be an influencer. I didn't even know what an influencer was. And probably, I don't even know if it was a thing when I started. I'm not sure. But you realize like the power of an idea.
Yeah.
Because now anyone with an idea, whether it's how to have the best pink lips in the world or whether it's how to use blockchain technology for changing the world, if there's a community out there who are interested in your idea, then, you have a voice. You don't need to be elected. You don't need to be the head of a company. But if you've got people who believe in what you stand for and what you're trying to do, then you can have a really strong voice, which was a discovery for me. But of course that means it's a responsibility, because you need to continue not to kind of veer from your path.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, because I've always tried, people often ask me to advise on their projects, and I do, but only if I actually really believe in the project, and I won't go and be an ambassador for a project that's doing something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so I think you've got to go, this is why people are following me, and I have to maintain that integrity and, be that source of trust that people are coming to.
Yeah.
So that was a big lesson for me. And I've learned so much about the evolution of the technology too. And I think that's why I was saying actually in 2019, we've got to stop talking about blockchain. we've got to talk about the convergence of many technologies, whether it's IoT or AI, and Metaverse has got AR, VR. Like, it's how any of these new technologies can come together and create something that's good.
Absolutely. Because I love the way you began the answer by saying the first thing is that we need to talk about it, because stop using the word, because it limits us. It stops us from asking the why part of it. Within that, so in the continuation of that would be, you earlier mentioned about the different governments accepting blockchain in its own way or rather rejecting it, whatever they would do. So it's a very peculiar technology in its own sense, or even it's the philosophy of decentralization, for example. How do you think that, let us say, these two elements, the major big companies, the big tech, and the governments, how do you see blockchain being accepted by them, and how, or rather you could say, how the interaction is going to turn out with the current major tech companies as well as the governments?
So I'll start with the governments first, because I genuinely think the government's intention, by and large, is good. They want to stop terrorist financing, they want to stop money laundering, and they don't want consumers to get hurt. You know, however they execute it, that's their motivation. And so I think the best way to help governments is to work hand in hand with them, industry to work hand in hand with them. But it's never helpful when you're in that relationship working hand in hand with them and then some major scam or rug pull happens or, you know, some coin crashes into oblivion from, you know, so that actually doesn't help. But I do think that industry partnering and working with government and helping educate government and providing constructive suggestions to government about how they could reasonably regulate. Because, you know, how do you regulate a DAO? You know, but people are coming up with suggestions. Government can run a node so they can actually see transparently what's going on in a DAO. But probably that needs to be a collaborative thought process. Because I do believe ultimately they're the issues that governments are concerned about. And I mean, there's definitional issues as well, of course. You know, what's a security, what's a commodity, what's a utility, and that needs to be nutted out, because there's no widespread global lexicon of blockchain. And that needs to happen, because then we know we're talking about apples or oranges or in terms of the big techs, you know, I believe the big techs will want to maintain the monopoly that they have. And they're like serious contenders because they have so many users already. So I suspect that what they will do, I mean, as Facebook did, you know, first they announced Libra, they're going to have their own token, and then they announced Metaverse, they're going to have their own Metaverse. So they're going to try and keep up with the technology and see how they can, and I'm going to use the word in inverted commas, own it. And you know, if you look in terms of big techs and health techs, they're just going out and buying these companies that are already developing things that they see they could use. And I'm quite sure that they'll buy or integrate certain aspects of blockchain and gaming and different things within which they're doing. So I think that they'll just continue their quest to kind of gobble up the world. And we're like if I say we, the Web3 community, we've got to face up the fact we're not taking over the world, we're minnows. But I think by working together and by having an inspired vision of what technology can do for the future, we'll be able to create alternatives. I don't think ever world domination is going to be in our hands, but I think that we're going to be able to do some things that are going to be tremendously helpful to all sorts of people and governments. And in the end, I think there'll always be this playoff between, you know, like the open metaverse, the closed metaverse, the companies that want to be extractive and make profits, and those that want to be democratic and share the wealth around.
Thank you for the beautiful answer. And you've seen and you know use cases. You're the author of books in blockchain. So all while covering all of these use cases, by sometimes seeing them, sometimes reading about them, if I were to ask you to pick 3 use cases of a blockchain application that's really close to your heart, can you just pick 3 out of that? Like, what would be your top 3 picks?
Well, I think this is a bit of a self-serving question by you because I want to pick your farmers project. but other than that, no, because what you've been able to demonstrate is what people have been talking about. You've actually onboarded the farmers. You've got a working live example of how this can actually be used for a number of purposes within agricultural supply chains. And with, I think one of the important things about your project is you see a lot of projects being cooked up by teams in New York and Los Angeles or anywhere who don't really understand the context of the farmers. And you really engage the farmers in helping them use technology to solve problems that they wanted to solve. So that's one. And another one in a similar vein actually is Sophie Blackstead and Hive Online, which is working with women's cooperatives in Niger and other countries in Africa, helping them kind of digitize, helping them create credit scores and helping them in a group, not individually, to be able to kind of access the financial system. And then for the third one, maybe I'm going to pick, just because I think it was so revolutionary, and even though I know Axie Infinity, the price of the token went down and, they had a hack, that's actually like a problem along the way. What they created and what they showed us, even though it wasn't perfect, was that it's possible using blockchain and gamification to be able to create new economies where the poor can earn money if they've got a mobile phone. And I think the next wave of these X2Earn projects are going to fix the token economics and are going to think of different ways to reward people with mobile phones for doing things that we need done. Even if it's like go and check if there's potatoes in that shop. So there's so many things we can pay people for if they've got a mobile phone, and these are people who otherwise might not have an alternative source of earning. So I think that's probably a revolutionary breakthrough that we haven't seen the last of yet.
Yes, and the way that you put things across to everyone, it's pretty clear that you understand the simple thing that blockchain is not just a technology. In order to make it happen, you would need everyone's participation. And that requires the basic assumption, the human assumption that yes, everyone can understand the simple philosophy behind it. So whenever I've been following you, whenever I see your posts, one thing which is very apparent in your approach is you want everyone to understand and ensure that this just doesn't become a niche for the technology people to own and to mold it in their own way, because that's the doom of this technology if it happens that way. It would require everyone's participation in it. And that is how you explain it to everyone, that the philosophy behind it, the use cases behind it are all something that everyone should understand, because it is the people who will come up with the good use cases. So can you just tell everyone the importance of just understanding the technology and immersing themselves within its philosophy in a way?
Well, I think they simply need to know how it can be used to help them. I don't think they need to immerse themselves in the technology. I think they just need to be open to understanding the ways in which they can deploy it. And one of the simplest ones for me is about remittances or sending money, whether it's from remittances or not. So if you think a significant proportion of the world's population live on remittances, they go and work in another country and they send money home. Now, historically, when you've sent money like that, you either send it through a bank or you send it through Western Union. And depending on where you live, they could take anything from 7 to 30%. So when you've not earned much and you're sending home $200 and 30% of that gets taken out, and sometimes it might take with a bank 2 or 3 days, and then you can compare that with sending it immediately and instantly, essentially at no fee. But I just want to continue for a moment. So that's the first thing. I can tell that I'm sending $200, you get $200, and you get $200 instantly. But you might live somewhere where there's no bank.
Yeah.
and no Western Union.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you have to somehow get transportation and travel often a long way to go somewhere where there's a bank or Western Union to get your money. But with blockchain and mobile phones, I can send it to you where you are for 70% of the world's population. So that's really powerful. But then if you think about, for example, the amount of money that's spent on refugees by the UN and associated agencies, a lot of that money goes in direct cash grants to the refugees. How is it sent? Through the banks. So for those hundreds of millions of dollars that are being sent, the banks are getting a pass-through for all of it. And that's not necessary. So you could release that money that the banks are taking and give more money to more refugees.
Absolutely. And because as you said, more than half the world is, if it's depending on it, and that's a major problem that could be solved, then why not? And especially the unbanked problem. One thing which was again apparent throughout is the philosophy has to be there, and then blockchain becomes a way to enable it. And that I think is going to be the most major takeaway. What I also want the viewers to know that this is going to be an ongoing conversation with Jane, because thankfully she'll always keep supporting us. And for this, for now, we would like to just thank you, Jane, for coming over here. Our entire team is thankful to you. And as you know, you're invited at my home also, but we'll keep that for the next trip. And I will see you again very soon.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more conversations with Jane and for more such content, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.